You need a cyclone separator, right? Not necessarily. In this video, I'm going to help you answer that question for yourself by doing a few things. First, we're going to compare these three very similar but very differently priced cyclone separators in terms of performance. But then, more importantly, I want to help you answer a few questions that not a lot of people talk about. And those questions are, do these things really save you money in the long run? Do you even really need one for your wood shop? And perhaps most importantly, how do they affect the performance of commonly used shop vacs and dust extractors? Finally, I'm going to tell you whether you even need one of these things, and if so, which one I would recommend that you use. Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with what a cyclone separator does, but if you're not, let's talk just a little bit about the idea behind it. When it comes to wood shop dust collection, everybody is going to have a dust extractor or a shop vac of some sort. And these things can range anywhere from pretty affordable to incredibly expensive. They've got filters, they've got bags that go along with them, and that can add up in price. So the idea behind a cyclone separator is that we take something that is staged before our dust extractor or shop vac that is going to separate larger chips and most of your dust into this, allowing only the very finest of dust to go into this, which in the long run, in theory, saves you money on bags and filter replacements. Now, there are two very common styles of separator that you're going to see out there on the market for these smaller dust extractors, and that is the tall cyclone style and this lower profile style, which is called a theme baffle. Now, the idea for any of these cyclone separators is, as I mentioned, you're allowing gravity and centrifugal force to spin down heavier chips and heavier dust particles into a different bin that's only allowing really light dust particles to go into your extractor. Now, like most woodworkers, when I was building out my shop, I thought that this was just something you had to get. So my initial shop vac that I had a dust deputy, the nice tall cyclone one, and I had that built on a little cart. I think everybody has had one of those at some point. And like potentially many of you watching this video, I thought that that was just something you needed to have. It was kind of a rite of passage, and you really had to do it because everybody on YouTube was comparing them and saying which one's the best one and which one you should buy. Let's talk about these three in particular. And why did I choose these three to talk about? Well, number one, they're pretty common. I did some polls on Instagram and on my YouTube community page, and these three are actually pretty common ones that people have. They're also a good display of the different price ranges that you can pay for these sorts of things, all the way from the cheapest here for the Home Depot Dustopper, the mid-range Oneida Low Pro system, all the way up to the ridiculously priced Festool Cyclone. Now, in full disclosure, the Home Depot and the Festool I both purchased with my own money. The Oneida system was sent to me by Oneida. However, there were no promises made as to what sort of content I was going to make, what kind of reviews I was going to do. And my goal here is to give you guys an honest opinion on all three of these. And again, an honest opinion on whether you even need one of these or not. Now, to start off our comparison, we're going to do a few different things. We're going to compare size and portability and ease of use. We're also going to compare performance with two different types of dust extractors. First, I'm going to use this rigid shop vac style dust extractor, and we're also going to use a Festool CT26. These are two very common dust extractor setups in the woodworking world. They represent a range of prices, and again, they are somewhat similar when it comes to advertised performance and function, with the rigid having bigger capacity than the 26. For testing, we're going to do two different things. We're going to start out with empty bins in both of the dust extractors. We're going to hook up each of the different cyclone separators. We're going to do 5 minutes of sanding with a Rotex, which is a belt sander style sort of thing that's going to suck up a lot of dust. And we're going to do 5 cuts over at the miter saw. Once we've done all this, we're going to take a look inside the bin, look at the filters, and see how much dust wound up making it into the dust extractors themselves versus what made it into the separators. We're going to clean everything up in between all the steps, and we'll get a pretty reasonable comparison. Now, for each sanding operation, I'm going to be using the Rotex 150 in Rotex mode. Again, that makes it act basically like a belt sander. We're going to be using this Mirka Abranet 120 grit paper. We'll change a new piece of paper on for each operation. Let's get sanding, see how it goes. Starting off with the combination of the rigid and the Home Depot Dustopper. All right, so this thing was clean when I started, and you can see pretty good amount of dust in there. Captured quite a bit of dust. Looking here at the board itself, there's very minimal dust around the table here where I was actually sanding. Now next up, let's look in the vacuum itself. Now, first of all, looking at the filter here, that definitely has a ton of dust stuck in the filter. So I'm gonna have to clean this thing out in between every use. Now in the vac itself, you can definitely see that there is some dust in there. Not a ton though, and certainly something that if you were using a bag, it would take you a long time to fill this bad boy up. All right, next up we are going to be going with the Oneida Low Pro here. As with all of these, again, I'm using the included hose. The included hose for the Low Pro is definitely a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker than the Dustopper. So let's plug it in, same tests, see how it goes. First impressions, just noticed I saw less dust coming off of the miter saw. The sanding was about the same, so kind of pretty similar performance. So let's see what's inside. All right, so here's what we have inside the Oneida. Obviously, caught a ton of dust. So filter is definitely just like before, very much full. So except for some static cling on the inside of this bad boy, there's really no appreciable dust at the bottom. So as advertised, got more dust to the actual bucket itself of the separator than to the vac itself. All right, now last but not least for the rigid, pairing it with the Festool Cyclone, far and away the most expensive one in the bunch. All right, so all done with the Festool. Let's see what's in the box. So a lot of static in a dry shop today, but that's what we got for Festool. A similar pattern to what I'm kind of noticing with what was left in the Dustopper. These are really rough. There's a lot less fine dust in here than there was in the Oneida. And then let's check the vac out. Once again, filter is a mess. Yeah, so definitely a lot more. Now again, is it a lot in the big picture? Not really, but it's definitely notably more than was in after the Oneida. And I'll have to check the film, but pretty close to, if not maybe a little more than was in there with the Dustopper. All right, so that's with the rigid vac. Let's switch over to the CT26. Now, as an example of how good these things can be, my CT26 that I'm using, I have had the Oneida Ultimate Dust Deputy set up on that for probably about 10 months to a year now. This is the original bag. There's almost nothing, but even more impressive for the Festool CT26, let's look at the filter. A year on this thing with the Dust Deputy. Now you saw the rigid. It is perfectly clean. There's nothing in here. Man. All right, so here's your wind speed velocity for the Festool vac just by itself. First up with the CT26, the Dustopper. So there's what we got in the bucket. And let's take a look at the vac itself here. So definitely a fair amount of dust got into the Festool vac itself with the Dustopper. All right, let's check out the Low Pro. All right, so here is the Oneida with the Festool CT26. Really good amount there, wound up in the bin. Really not much. I mean, just a very fine layer of dust all around the outside of it. All right, now last but not least, the full Festool system here. Now, if you already have a Festool vac like the 26 that is compatible with sustainers, that has this docking top, because not all of them do, this is one place where this Festool Cyclone probably does have an advantage over the other ones. Portability, transport, taking it places. This thing works with the docking system. You can lock it in, and now you can transport it. And on top of that, you can even put sustainers on top of this to allow you to transport it around if you're doing job site work. Now, obviously, Festool does recommend that you turn down variable suction when you're trying to get optimal dust extraction. Since the rigid vac doesn't have that, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this thing at full suction with all of the cyclones so I can get as much of an apples to apples test between the two as possible. All right, so let's check out the Festool and how it did. So interestingly, performance-wise, at least looking at this, looks a little bit better than it was with the rigid. Yep. So you can see not really a ton in there. So that's how much is getting to your bag. So there's your performance test. A couple of things that are key takeaways that, again, I'm not really shocked with because I've used all this stuff for a long time. The Festool vac definitely outperformed the rigid vac. They both did okay. The Festool, again, just did better, and with the cost of it, I would hope it would. Now, looking at all these from left to right, we have the rigid and then the CT26 with the Dustopper. Rigid is always on the left, CT26 is on the right, and this is what was left over in each bucket after the performance testing was done. The Dustopper and the Festool Cyclone both lost a bunch of suction. Oneida kept a really good amount of suction. Now, the other thing that I can tell you is looking at each pile, there's a little bit more in the piles here for the Oneida, and there's more fine dust in the Oneida piles than there is in either of the piles for the Home Depot Dustopper or for the Festool Cyclone. So the Oneida is definitely getting more fine dust particles out before they get to your vac. So for you to make an educated decision about whether or not you even actually need to buy one of these things, let's talk performance, let's talk pricing, and then let's talk about our rationale. Now, from a performance standpoint, first let's look at the two dust extractors that we used. And what's interesting is that the rigid actually advertises more CFM than the Festool vac does. But what we saw was a higher wind speed velocity for the Festool vac than the rigid. Now, regardless of the fact that there was a difference, the difference was actually pretty small. So they both had somewhat similar wind speed velocities. And what was interesting to me is there was obviously a drop in performance with all three of the cyclones with both of the vacs. And that's something that you're gonna have to consider is, are you okay with the trade-off in drop-off in performance to get the added benefit that these things provide in dust and chip collection? Now, the data matched up well with my subjective impression, which was that the Oneida was the best performer of all of them with the least loss of performance from the vacs themselves. When you look at the Oneida Low Pro there on both the rigid as well as the Festool, it only lost somewhere between 12 to 15, 16% of the performance. So pretty good there. On the other hand, you look at the Dustopper, you look at the Festool, and we're losing up to 45%. So almost half of our performance taken out by the Festool Cyclone when you look at it with the rigid vac. Now, obviously, performance is one component that we have to consider, but then cost is another. So starting off with the vacuums, at the time of this recording, the rigid vac is going for about $100 if you get it from Home Depot, more if you buy it from Amazon, and the Festool CT26 is going for $799 for a vacuum. It's kind of crazy. Now, when we look at the consumables for rigid, The bags that I found were about 10 bucks, and the filter that you can buy as replacements, about 25 bucks for those. So all in, you're less than $150 for that kind of rigid setup with spare bags and a spare filter. For the Festool, on the other hand, their bags, if you buy genuine Festool bags and genuine Festool filters, you're looking at 46 bucks for the bags, $115 for the HEPA filter. So again, another, $160 just for extra bags and filters. And then there's the cost of the actual separators themselves. So there's currently two different versions of the Dustopper. The one that I used was an older version that goes for about 45 bucks. The Dustopper Pro, which as far as I can tell really only has a clear top versus the orange top. I don't know what else is different with it. Goes for about 60 bucks. When we look at the Oneida, for just the top, that's coming in at about 60 bucks. So again, just about the same amount as the Dustopper Pro. And for the Low Pro full kit, you're looking at $140. Now, the Festool is just kind of ridiculous, and that is $419 currently if you buy it new. Obviously, you can buy it used, looking at Facebook Marketplace and stuff like that, but that is a lot for a separator that really poorly affected the performance of both of our dust extractors. So let's answer the question whether or not you actually need to buy one of these things. And I think that comes down to what kind of a woodworker are you and how do you plan on using this equipment? If you're a weekend warrior who's only out here a couple hours a week maybe, you're not going through a lot of production, you're not making a whole ton of dust, then to be quite honest with you, I don't really think that you do, because even if you were to buy the Dustopper Pro top, you can get multiple bags and replacement filters for $35. So you could probably get 2 rounds of multiple bags and filters for about the same that you would pay for the setup. And if you're only going through a bag every year, 2 bags every year, then you have to ask yourself, does it really make sense for me to go and spend extra money and take extra space up in my shop for something that really isn't saving me all that much money or time? So if that's you, I don't think so. I would say if that's you, you buy the rigid vac setup if you're looking to save money. And if you've got money to burn and you want to buy the Festool, go for it and have fun, because this is your hobby and I don't judge. Now, at the other end of the spectrum is the professional. Obviously, one of the things that you have to look at as a business owner are the cost of your consumables, and that's really going to be the big question here, as well as the cost of maintenance for the tools. The other thing that you're going to be doing is saving time in terms of replacing bags, cleaning filters, replacing filters, all that stuff, because you can just really easily pop the top, dump this thing out in the trash, put it back on, you're back in business. So in that situation, you're going through tons of bags a year and everything like that, then absolutely, I think it makes complete sense for someone in that situation to buy one of these. Now, if you're somewhere in between, just a hobbyist, but more than a weekend warrior, then it's really up to you and how valuable you consider your time. I really like having these things, again, for the idea that it is going to save money on the extractors in the long run, because I'm putting them under less stress by keeping everything cleaner, going through less consumables. I like all that, but you may not, and that's totally cool. So really, unless you're a pro financially, it's really kind of your own personal decision whether you want to do that or not, and certainly not something that you absolutely have to buy. Now, what would I recommend you purchase out of these 3? Well, to me, the hands down winner is the Oneida, and again, this was not something they asked me to say. It's just using their products. They just work well, and the data proves that. There was much less performance loss. I saw more fine dust wind up in the buckets, thus protecting my extractors a little bit more. And I just don't see the sense, especially when you can just buy the Oneida top for the same cost as the Dustopper, when it performed so much better, and again, in my experience, has performed so much better. I think that the Oneida is the clear winner. Now, the one that makes absolutely zero sense to me, except in 2 situations, is the Festool Cyclone. It is way too much money for the level of performance that it has. To me, the value of it, just on performance alone, doesn't make sense. However, I think there are 2 exceptions to this. The first exception is the Festool fanboy. And if you're the type of person that you see green, and even though it doesn't make financial sense, you just have to have it, then the Festool Cyclone is definitely for you.
I'm right here.
On the other hand, the other situation where I think the Festool actually makes a lot of sense is a professional who's going into people's homes and who's already bought into the Festool system. As we already talked about a little bit, there's a lot that works with the Festool vac in terms of being able to dock the Festool Cyclone on top of it, and then to put Festool sustainers on top of it. So if I'm going up and down flights of steps, going into somebody's home, I want transportability and I want a little bit of help collecting some dust. Now, obviously, you saw the dust results. It still collected plenty of dust. But in that situation, the portability may actually be something that pushes that performance aside just a little bit. So I'm interested to hear what you think. Do you think that people need to buy these things? What do you think about my analysis? What do you think about my testing? And I'm interested to hear what kind of cyclone separator you have, if in fact you do have one. So let me know down in the comments your thoughts on any of that. Any comments, questions, concerns, leave them down there and I will get back to you. So that's gonna do it for this video. Thanks for watching and we'll catch you on the next one. This is the last dust collection video I do. I'm covered.